Ethan drew the dare card, make out with your crush for 2 minutes. Amid the excited whoops from our friends, he stood up and walked toward me. We hadn't spoken for weeks, and my heart was racing. Nervous and shy, I closed my eyes, waiting. But Ethan just leaned close to my ear and let out a cruel laugh. You really thought I'd kiss you, Sophie. Sorry, but I'm so over you. Then he turned and kissed the pretty freshman instead. In that moment, something inside me just broke. The next day, I applied to schools abroad and accepted the marriage arrangement my family had been pushing for. On his birthday, I boarded a plane and never looked back. But as soon as I landed, my phone exploded with calls from him. 1. Ethan was already tipsy when he drew the dare card. Our friend grabbed it, reading dramatically, make out with your crush for 2 minutes. Everyone immediately looked at me, whooping and cheering. This whole party was Ethan's idea. We hadn't spoken for over a month usually, I was the one who gave in first when we fought. But this time, something in me refused to back down. I thought the silent treatment would continue, but today he suddenly called me. My fingers nervously twisted the hem of my dress as Ethan stood up. The girls next to me giggled, giving me playful nudges. Sophie, your boyfriend's coming to kiss you. Joy flickered in my chest as I looked up at him. He was wearing that white shirt I loved, collar slightly messy. His eyes looked so tender through the haze of alcohol. My cheeks burned as I looked down, gripping my dress tighter, palms growing sweaty. When I looked up again, Ethan was right in front of me. Sophie. He bent down, his voice soft and warm with drink. Overwhelmed with nerves and embarrassment, I squeezed my eyes shut as he leaned in. 2. But the kiss I was waiting for never came. Instead, I felt his hot breath on my ear, followed by a quiet, mocking laugh. You want me to kiss you that badly? It's only been a month and you're this desperate, Sophie. My eyes flew open. Ethan was already standing straight again, a cold smirk on his thin lips. His eyes held nothing but disdain. In that moment, all the blood rushed to my head, but my hands and feet went ice cold. I sat there frozen, watching in shock as he walked away. In the stunned silence of the room, he took the pretty freshman's hand. May I? I knew she'd had a crush on him forever, showing her interest countless times. When I'd gotten jealous before, he'd carelessly dismissed it, saying he wasn't interested in her. But now, after she nodded shyly, he didn't hesitate to kiss her. The full 2 minutes, not a second less. When they finished, he even reached up to brush her swollen lips, wiping away the trace of their kiss. 3. The girl sitting next to me looked at me with sympathy and concern. Ethan gave me a cold glance before returning to his seat and grabbing a bottle. Why's everyone so quiet? This is fun. Let's keep playing. Someone tried to smooth things over. Ethan, you've had enough to drink. Yeah, Ethan, look, Sophie's about to cry. Go comfort her. Ethan leaned back in his chair, looking casual. Why should I comfort her? She's your girlfriend, and you went too far just now. Who said she's my girlfriend? Ethan's mocking smile grew colder. We broke up a month ago, didn't we? I looked down, letting out a soft, bitter laugh. Sophie, are you okay? The girl next to me squeezed my hand. I shook my head. I'm fine. I should go. You guys keep playing. As I walked out, I heard the freshman's sweet voice. Is she mad? Who cares? Ethan called for more drinks. Let's keep going. Ethan, Sophie seems really upset this time. I didn't stop, heading straight for the door. Ethan's bored voice drifted after me. Not my problem. She always gets really upset. And she always comes crawling back, begging to get back together. So do you want to get back together with her? The closing door cut off all sound. I didn't hear his answer. But it didn't matter anymore. 4. I'd chosen to stay in the country for grad school because of Ethan. But now, studying abroad suddenly seemed like a great idea. I spent some time collecting my things from Ethan's apartment and moving them back to my dorm. I didn't tell anyone about my plans to study abroad. There was so much to prepare, I got caught up in the busyness of it all. Gradually, I thought about Ethan less and less. Until that day when I ran into him and his friends at the campus cafe. Another pretty young girl was hanging on his arm, not the same freshman as last time. Sophie, long time no see. Join us for lunch. His friend greeted me with a smile. I smiled back politely. Thanks, but I'm meeting my roommates. Well, come to our usual spot tonight for drinks. I glanced at Ethan automatically. His expression was cold and unreadable, but he didn't interrupt his friend. My heart felt perfectly calm as I shook my head. Sorry, I have other plans tonight. What's with all the chit-chat over lunch? Ethan suddenly shot his friends an icy look and stormed off. His friend apologized awkwardly. I waved it off and walked away. Later, heading back to my dorm, I ran into Ethan and his new girlfriend again. She was hanging on his neck, constantly reaching up for kisses. Ethan looked somewhat irritated. I walked past without a glance, about to enter the building. But Ethan called out, "Sophie." 5. I paused for a moment but didn't stop. Ethan called again, "Sophie, I'm talking to you. Didn't you hear me?" He pushed his girlfriend away and walked right up to me. "Need something?" I looked at him calmly. "Yes." "Okay, what is it?" Ethan's girlfriend followed, pressing against him and glaring at me. "Those cakes you used to make me, where did you buy them?" Ethan lazily put an arm around his girlfriend, looking down at me. "My girlfriend loves cake too. I want to get her some. I bake them myself." My gaze remained steady. "If she wants, I can send her the recipe." Ethan frowned. "Don't bother. How about this, make me 2 cakes? I'll pay you, of course." I smiled slightly. "Sorry, I don't have time." "Is it really about time, or are you just jealous?" Ethan gave me a mocking look. "Bitter?" Suddenly, I realized how pointless this all was. I didn't want to argue or waste breath on pointless things. "Think whatever you want," I said, walking past him and hurrying into the dorm. As soon as I got to my room, my roommate pulled me to the window. Below, Ethan was arguing with his new girlfriend. It didn't take long before he irritably shook off her hand and drove away. The girl stood there crying for a while before finally leaving too. My roommate couldn't help speculating, "Sophie, I think Ethan still has feelings for you. Maybe he's just trying to make you jealous so you'll apologize first." I laughed, playfully poking her forehead. "You've been reading too many bad romance novels, sweetie." 6. I'd previously turned down my family's marriage arrangement because of Ethan. Now that they heard about my plans to study abroad, they brought it up again. "Uncle, can I think about it some more?" "Of course. You want to continue your studies, so there's no rush for marriage. Just meet him before you go abroad. You should at least like the person." "Okay." This time, I didn't reject their good intentions. My 2 uncles loved me dearly. After Mom passed away and Dad remarried, they became the ones who cared for me most in this world. That evening, I had dinner with my best friend to tell her about my study abroad plans. While I was in the bathroom, Ethan called, "Sophie, what about your stuff?" I took it back to my dorm. His voice was unreadable. "Well, make sure you got everything. My girlfriend's coming over tonight and she's upset about seeing your things." "Sorry about that. Just throw them away." "Fine, I'll throw them out. Don't regret it later." He hung up. I stared at my confused reflection in the mirror. I couldn't understand what he meant. If I didn't want him anymore, why would I care about the things he gave me? 7. I agreed to meet my uncle's candidate before going abroad. But I never expected him to be Alexander Gu, someone I'd known since childhood as a distant family friend. My best friend froze, gripping my hand and screaming, "Sophie, it's Alexander Gu." Oh my god. I instinctively sat up straight, my face flushing. I had no idea it would be him. "I can't handle this, Sophie. I need to escape." With that, she let go of my hand. Before Alexander even reached us, she jumped up. "Mr. Gu, I need to use the restroom." She gave a quick, polite bow and practically sprinted away. "Hello, Alex," I said softly, suddenly shy about meeting his eyes like I used to. Alexander sat across from me. "What would you like to eat?" "Anything is fine. I'm not picky." He ordered several dishes, then asked, "Is this okay?" Looking at the menu, I realized they were all my favorites. Surprised, I glanced at him. The man I remembered as distant and intimidating looked more casual today, less imposing than usual. Still, I felt nervous, answering quietly, "Yes, that's fine." After the waiter left, Alexander suddenly asked, "Sophie, are you afraid of me?" I nodded automatically, then quickly shook my head in confusion. In the past, I'd only seen him from afar when visiting my uncles. During family gatherings, I'd stand quietly to the side, never joining the conversation. He wasn't actually that old, just in a different social position. He was only 27. "So, what do you think of me?" I was caught off guard. Alexander smiled. "Don't be nervous. Take your time to answer." I took a deep breath. "Alex." "Sophie, you can use my first name." I pressed my palms together nervously, finally managing to say, "Alexander. I'm going abroad to study for at least 2 years. "That's fine. If you're willing, we could get engaged first." "Why?" I was confused. He could have his pick of anyone. And I was just a girl whose mother died young, and whose father remarried, basically alone in the world. Alexander handed me a glass of juice. His fingers were long and elegant against the glass, almost artistic. I found myself staring. He set down his glass and gently touched the top of my head. "Sophie, I don't want to frighten you. So let's keep this between us for now." 9. 3 days before my departure, Alexander and I got quietly engaged. The day before I left, Ethan suddenly called. "Sophie, tomorrow's my birthday." I answered absently while packing. You know the place." Ethan's voice held its usual lazy drawl. "I'm giving you an opening. Take it or leave it." Before I could process this, he hung up. My uncle knocked on my door. "Sophie, Alexander's here to take you to dinner." I quickly answered, closing my suitcase. Ethan's call was already forgotten. Since I had a long flight the next day, Alexander brought me home early. He'd had a little wine at dinner. As I was getting out of the car, he gently caught my wrist. "Sophie." With a slight pull, I found myself close to him. The scent of wine mingled with his cologne. This close, the woody, clean scent enveloped me completely. So different from Ethan's young, prideful energy. Alexander had the distinct presence of a mature man. For a moment, I felt dizzy with emotion. Then Alexander leaned down and kissed me softly. "Get some rest. I'll take you to the airport tomorrow." He reached up to brush my lips gently. While I was still flustered, he whispered in my ear, "My sweet Sophie, soft as cotton." 10. By 7 that evening, all of Ethan's friends had arrived. There was an empty seat beside him. He hadn't brought a date. Everyone knew why. That seat was for me. After all this time, they could see it clearly. Ethan still had feelings for me. He was just too proud, always wanting others to give in first. "After tonight, you two should stop this nonsense. What's the point of walking around with that face? Like we all owe you $1 million. When Sophie gets here, apologize properly, okay?" Ethan glanced carelessly at the door. "I won't. I'm already doing her a favor by giving her a chance." "You're impossible. What time is it? Why isn't Sophie here yet? Did you tell her, Ethan?" He checked his watch. "She'll come if she wants to. I'll go look outside." Ethan didn't stop them. He stood and walked to the window. The sky was growing dark. He watched the cars below. Each one passing by might or might not be the one he was waiting for. Somehow, Ethan found himself thinking about his birthday last year. Things had been perfect with Sophie then. She'd given him a belt and cufflinks that he wore almost every day, and the diamond earrings he'd given her on her birthday. She used to wear them daily too, but she'd left them at his apartment, hadn't taken them with her. For some reason, that thought made his chest feel heavy. Just then, someone burst through the door, shouting excitedly, "Ethan, she's here." He spun around, feeling the weight lift from his heart instantly. He knew how much Sophie loved him. He'd known she would come tonight. And this time, he would be the one to apologize first. 11. Ethan leaned against the windowsill, still maintaining that casual, lazy pose, as if he couldn't care less who walked through that door, as if his heart wasn't full of hope. But his arm on the windowsill was tense. His fingers had curled into tight fists without him noticing. The huge surprise is almost here. Everyone was excited, the energy in the room rising. A faint smile appeared on Ethan's lips. He lowered his eyes, saying carelessly, "Same thing every year. What kind of surprise could it be? This time is different, really." Ethan's face remained neutral, but his heart was racing. What surprise would Sophie have for him? His friends were right. He'd gone too far. That day, he'd lost his mind, kissing another girl right in front of her. He'd regretted it the moment his lips left the freshman's. If Sophie had shed even one tear, he would have apologized immediately. But she hadn't. She'd just quietly left. Since then, he'd been acting out, dating girl after girl. Sophie must have been hurting so much. But even so, she'd still prepared a birthday surprise for him. Suddenly, Ethan made up his mind. This was it. She was the one. He'd stop being so careless and really commit to Sophie. A friend came over, bumping his shoulder, whispering, "Drop the attitude, okay?" For once, Ethan's arrogance vanished as he softly agreed. His friend looked surprised. "You really learned your lesson." Ethan smiled. "I really did. Oh my God, I never thought I'd see the day. What I did before was terrible," Ethan said, looking at his friend with complete sincerity. "I've made up my mind. I'm going to settle down with Sophie, never make her upset again." His friend beamed. "About time. Sophie's going to be so happy." "It's not too late." Just as Ethan finished speaking, 2 waiters wheeled in a huge pink box wrapped with ribbons. Ethan froze. His friend laughed, pushing him forward. "Go on, open it. See what surprise Sophie prepared." His heart was racing now, but he felt oddly nervous, like coming home after too long away. He'd seen it all as a rich playboy, but now his palms were sweating with anticipation. Would Sophie be inside? Was that her surprise, giving herself to him? 12. Ethan's mind was a mess of thoughts. He and Sophie had dated for over 2 years. Sometimes when she studied late for her grad school entrance exams, she'd stay at his off-campus apartment. But they'd never taken that final step. He'd been frustrated about that. Most of their fights had been about it. He remembered their worst fight. Sophie had cried her heart out, and he hadn't even tried to comfort her, too caught up in his own selfish desires. Only now did Ethan finally understand. Sophie had no mother, and her father had remarried, starting a new family that had no room for her. If he really cared for her, really loved her, he would have understood her insecurity, given her promises, commitment, made her feel secure. Ethan suddenly made another decision. He'd propose tonight. As he thought this, his racing heart suddenly calmed, as if deep down, he'd been waiting for this moment all along. His friends crowded around, pushing him toward the huge pink box. He reached out and pulled the ribbon's bow. The lid opened, releasing colorful heart-shaped balloons. And in the midst of the floating balloons, a girl in a matching pink ribbon top and skirt jumped up, shouting happily, "Ethan, surprise!" Sweet perfume wafted over as a soft, curvy body launched into his arms, hugging his neck tight. She hung on him completely. Before Ethan could process this, the girl planted a loud kiss on his cheek. "Happy birthday, Ethan. Are you surprised? Didn't expect this, did you?" The girl tilted her pretty face up, looking at him with pure joy. Ethan stood frozen, just staring at the girl in his arms. For a moment, he felt confused and dazed. When had Sophie become this forward, this enthusiastic? When had Sophie's face become so unfamiliar, so annoying? For a full 30 seconds, he slowly came back to reality. When the girl stood on tiptoes for another kiss, he suddenly pushed her away, hard. "Ethan!" The girl nearly fell, stomping her foot in hurt anger. The bright lights fell on her face. On her ears, 2 diamonds sparkled blindingly. The sight stabbed through Ethan's eyes. He stepped forward, grabbing her arm, his handsome face twisted in fury. "Who said you could wear those earrings? Who gave you permission?" The girl's face went white with fear. "You said they were an eyesore, told me to throw them away. But they were so pretty, I couldn't bear to take them off." The girl stood stunned. Ethan stared at her coldly, his grip tightening. "You can take them off yourself, or I'll do it for you." The room fell deathly silent, broken only by the girl's growing sobs. She removed the earrings with shaking hands and threw them at him, crying out, "Ethan, I'm breaking up with you." "Breaking up?" Ethan clutched the earrings tight, laughing. "Were we ever dating? Did I ever say you were my girlfriend?" The girl froze, tears streaming down her face. "But you dated me, took me home, you kissed me, and held me. So what?" Ethan's laugh was cruel. "I've kissed lots of girls. Are they all my girlfriends?" "Ethan, you jerk. You're right. I am a jerk. Now, can you get out?" Blood slowly seeped from Ethan's clenched fist. The earrings had cut into his palm, but he wouldn't let go. The pain helped him face reality. Sophie wouldn't be coming to his birthday, and he'd been foolish enough to wait for her. Wait for her surprise. 13. The long flight finally ended. It was sunset when I arrived in my new country. Back home, it would be 3 or 4 in the morning. As soon as I turned on my phone, messages flooded in. It took a while for them to stop coming. I opened them casually. Almost all were messages and missed calls from Ethan. I frowned, surprised. This wasn't like him at all. During our previous fights, he'd never reach out unless I apologized first. Well, he had reached out once just to humiliate me in public. Now when I thought about that night, it felt like another lifetime. I smiled, pushing those unpleasant memories away. My phone started ringing again. Still Ethan. I ignored it, but he called again. I didn't hate Ethan. His family did a lot of business with my uncles. I hadn't planned on cutting him out of my life completely, just going back to being polite strangers. But apparently, that wasn't what he wanted. And now I was engaged. I needed to maintain appropriate boundaries with other men. I rejected the call and blocked his number. A moment later, my friend called. I didn't answer that either. She quickly sent a message. "Sophie, please pick up. It was Ethan's birthday yesterday. You didn't come and he drank all night. He's still getting 4 fluids at the hospital. We can all see he really regrets it this time. Sophie, please give him one more chance." I gripped my phone, looking at the car Alexander had sent waiting nearby. Remembering his goodbye hug at the airport made me feel warm inside. He'd promised to fly out every month to see me. He'd told me to focus on my studies, that he'd wait patiently until I finished, that I'd never hear any gossip about him while I was abroad. Thinking of Alexander always made me feel secure. No more constant worry and doubt. After some thought, I replied to my friend, "We're broken up. Please don't tell me anything about him anymore. Thanks." After sending it, I locked my phone and put it in my bag. Alexander's staff came to help with my luggage. The driver opened the door respectfully. "Miss Sophie, Mr. Gu has arranged everything. Let's take you home now." The car drove through the foreign streets. I watched the scenery curiously through the window. Everything felt new and full of hope. Suddenly, I felt excited about my new life ahead. 14. After I sent that message to my friend that day, Ethan never called or texted again. I quickly forgot everything about him, throwing myself completely into my new life and studies. A month later, Alexander came to visit as promised. For some reason, after just that short month, I felt oddly shy seeing him again. Even though at the airport before I left, he'd hugged and kissed me goodbye. But now I could barely look at him. As dinner was about to start, Alexander suddenly stood and moved from across the table to sit beside me. I immediately tensed up, sitting perfectly straight, hands on my knees, like a well-behaved schoolgirl. "Sophie." Alexander gently took my hand. My palm was sweaty, but he held on tight. "1 month apart and you're afraid of me again." I couldn't answer that strange, subtle feeling was impossible to describe. Should I start visiting twice a month? I turned to look at him suddenly, but as I turned, he leaned in and kissed me. "Sophie, I've missed you this month." His voice was low and husky against my lips. I instinctively tried to pull back, but he held my waist, keeping me still. The kiss wasn't too deep. Like the previous ones, it didn't make me uncomfortable or feel rushed. Instead, a pleasant feeling grew in my chest until I could hardly breathe. My heart felt like someone stirring honey water with crushed ice, sweetness rippling outward in waves. Without realizing it, I'd gripped his sleeve tight, creasing the fabric. Alexander only stopped when the waiter approached. My face felt hot. I must have been bright red. But after that, I wasn't shy or nervous with him anymore. Once, after a little wine, I even teased him. "Alexander, being with you feels so comfortable, so safe." "How so?" I propped my chin on my hand, looked at him for a while, then burst out laughing. "It's like being with you feels like being with my uncles. So relaxed, so comfortable, like I'm still a little kid." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "You are still a kid. Sophie, at your age, you should be carefree and unrestrained." He stroked my hair. "Keep being a kid. At least with me, you can stay this way forever." "Why?" I looked at him confused, asking that question again. "Why me? Why get engaged to me? Why be so good to me?" After Mom died, I learned something. Most people act out of self-interest. Before doing anything, they consider what's in it for them. But I'd thought it through carefully. Besides my inheritance from Mom, I had nothing anyone would want. And that inheritance meant nothing to someone like Alexander. "Sophie, I'll tell you on our wedding day." Alexander kissed my forehead and adjusted my scarf. "Sophie, you're drunk. Let's go home." "Okay, Alexander, let's go home." 15. 3 days after Alexander returned home, I was leaving the university library when I saw Ethan. The morning mist had cleared, but despite the sun, it was still cold. Even in my coat and scarf, I felt chilled. But Ethan stood under a tree wearing just a thin jacket. He looked thinner. Maybe from the long flight, he seemed tired too. But still striking, still eye-catching. Even on this foreign campus, he drew attention from passers-by. I paused, then continued walking with my books. I passed him without looking up or acknowledging him. But Ethan called out to me. "Sophie." He stepped forward, blocking my path. I didn't know how long he'd been standing there. The mist had dampened his hair and eyes. "I've been looking for you everywhere." I smiled slightly. "Do you need something? Why did you suddenly decide to study abroad? Why didn't you tell me? If it's about that dare game, Sophie, I can apologize." Ethan grabbed my arm. I stepped back, pulling my hand away. "It's all in the past, and I stopped caring a long time ago." Ethan frowned. "Then why study abroad?" "That was my choice." He stared at me, frowning deeper. "Fine, you're already here. Can't change that. I'll just have to fly out more often." I looked at him, surprised. "Fly out more often? I'm the guy, of course. I'll make the effort to visit you." "Stop." I cut him off. "Ethan, don't fly out to see me. You have no obligation to, and I don't want you to." "Sophie, so you're still angry, aren't you? If you're still upset, why say it's all in the past?" I almost laughed in frustration. "Ethan, how much clearer do I need to be?" I said it's in the past because I don't care about what happened and I don't care about you anymore, understand? "What do you mean? We broke up ages ago." I looked at him calmly. "Ethan, do you get it now?" 16. I don't know if Ethan was just too proud, or if I hadn't been clear enough. Instead of going home, he started waiting for me at school every day. At first, I ignored him completely, treating him like he didn't exist. But within days, rumors started spreading. People were talking about my handsome Asian boyfriend. I worried the gossip would spread and reach Alexander, that it would upset him. After thinking it through, I decided to have a proper talk with Ethan. But before I could speak, Ethan pulled out a ring. "Sophie, I know what you want. You want marriage, want security, right?" He grabbed my hand, trying to slip the ring on my finger. "Let's get engaged. We can get married whenever you want. That's what you want, isn't it?" I yanked my hand back and the ring fell on the table. The diamond was huge, brilliant. I won't deny that when I loved him most, I dreamed of this moment. But after all those silent treatments, all those fights about sleeping together, all those times I cried over other girls, and finally, watching him kiss that freshman, any love or hope I had for him had long since vanished. "Ethan, I only came to tell you again. We're broken up. Go home. Stop looking for me." Ethan suddenly seemed angry. "Sophie, you've played this game long enough. I won't force you to do anything you don't want anymore. You want marriage," I agreed. "What else do you want?" "Ethan, I'm engaged." I met his eyes calmly, "So please stop pursuing me, okay?" Ethan stared at me for a long moment, then laughed. "Stop joking, Sophie. Engaged to who? Who could you possibly be engaged to? We had a fight, didn't talk for a few days, and you got engaged to someone else." He looked at me. "Since when did you become so casual? Believe what you want. I've said everything I needed to say. If you keep harassing me at school, I'll call the police." I grabbed my bag and turned to leave. But Ethan grabbed my wrist. "Sophie, tell me who you're engaged to." He gripped so hard I stumbled. "We dated for 2 years. Even if we broke up and you found someone new, I should at least check him out, right?" "That's not necessary. Not necessary, or there's no one." Nice, using my old tricks. Trying to make me jealous. I really thought he was delusional. "Ethan, I'm not that petty." "Then tell me who your fiancé is. You really want to know?" "Of course. My ex-girlfriend's engaged. How could I not be curious?" I pointed to a business magazine on a nearby rack. Alexander Gu was on the cover. "That's him." Ethan glanced where I pointed and laughed. "Sophie, at least make up something believable. That's Alexander Gu. Even my dad has to bow to him." "I told you, it's him. Believe it or not." Ethan's expression softened, his smile widening. "Come on, stop playing games. Let's make up, be like we used to be, okay?" I looked at him tiredly, feeling any more explanation would just be ridiculous. I turned to leave without another word. Ethan started to follow me, but his phone rang. After a brief conversation, his face changed and he hurried to his car. I was confused but relieved. After Ethan left, the rumors quickly died down. Alexander's daily calls and video chats remained completely normal. I finally relaxed. Apparently, none of this drama had reached his ears. 17 months passed. Alexander kept his promise of visiting twice a month, never missing once. After that confrontation, Ethan didn't come back, though he tried calling from friends' phones sometimes. I'd hang up as soon as I heard his voice. As spring arrived, my birthday approached. Missing my uncles, I went home with Alexander for a visit. At the family dinner, Alexander suddenly mentioned getting our marriage license. I was surprised, but my uncles were thrilled. I felt no resistance actually, I felt happy too. We decided to get the license on my birthday and start preparing for the wedding. The night before getting our license, I met up with my closest girlfriends. Alexander said I should enjoy one last all-nighter with my friends. After tomorrow, no more staying out all night. At dinner, we ran into some of Ethan's old friends. Later, when my friends and I went to a trendy new club, I saw Ethan as soon as I got out of the car. He was leaning against his car, staring at me intensely. The early spring wind was still cold in the city. I pulled my coat tighter around me, walking past him without a glance. He didn't call out to me. My friends and I didn't really like noisy places like this. So after a short while, we decided to leave, planning to find a quiet lounge for tea and chat. But as I stood up, Ethan called out to me, "Sophie, now that you're back, don't go back to France." I found it unbelievable and absurd. I tried to walk past him, but Ethan blocked my path again. I didn't throw away these earrings. He opened his palm, the diamond earrings still sparkling brilliantly. When I first got this birthday gift, I'd been both overjoyed and somehow disappointed. Still, I'd worn them every day. But when I decided to move on completely, I'd left them at his apartment. I've been thinking a lot lately. You were right not wanting to sleep together before marriage. You were right not giving in during our last fight. I shouldn't have tried to hurt you, make you angry. But Sophie, all of this was because I still love you, still care about you. Ethan pointed to his tie, then showed me his cufflinks. See, I wear everything you gave me, every day. Sophie, we dated for 2 years, not 2 days or 2 months. I know you still care deep down, don't you? I was so tired of his speeches. I understood perfectly. He'd always gotten everything he wanted. He'd never been denied anything. Never had something and then lost it. That's why he couldn't accept it, why he kept pursuing me so stubbornly. His claims of love and care rang hollow. But I'm getting married tomorrow. Ethan, move on with your life. Sophie, fine, be angry. Get engaged out of spite if you want. But marriage isn't a small thing. Don't ruin your life just to get back at me. I shoved his hand away hard. Ethan, you're not that important. You haven't been important for a long time. I looked at him seriously one last time. Ethan, I wouldn't joke about my future just to spite someone who doesn't matter anymore. I'd never seen that expression on Ethan's face before. He was always so casual and indifferent, acting like nothing mattered. Even when I'd cry and say we should break up, he'd just frown and irritably light a cigarette. But now he stood there frozen, those usually flirtatious eyes completely lifeless. But whether he was hurting or sad, and how long it would last, none of it mattered to me anymore. 18. The day Alexander and I got our marriage license, we went to our new home together. Some things happened naturally, inevitably. My uncles strongly approved of my marriage to Alexander. He'd followed all the traditional steps seriously and respectfully. His sincerity had transformed my uncles from initial worry to complete acceptance. That's when I learned the truth. After Mom died, when Dad wanted to remarry, the reason I'd inherited my portion so smoothly was because of Alexander's help behind the scenes. Without him, even with both my uncles' support, it would have been a huge struggle. The heating in the house was warm. As Alexander dried my hair, whether from our closeness or the heat, my back was damp with sweat, my face flushed. Alexander, can you tell me why now? He turned off the hairdryer, leaning close to my ear. After the wedding night. Alexander. I glared at him in the mirror. After that, it'll be too late to change my mind. You want to change your mind? If you can't give me a satisfactory answer. My voice got quieter, because Alexander had wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, kissing me deeply. This kiss was different from his usual gentle, restrained ones. It was intense and passionate. I felt breathless. My legs went weak. Alexander lifted me onto the vanity. He brushed my messy hair back from my ear. When he kissed my earlobe, I trembled. Goosebumps rose on my neck. But his warm hand steadied me. What do you want, Sophie? Want to call off the wedding? Or run away? He kissed the sensitive spot on my neck. I pushed against his chest but had nowhere to retreat. Finally, he captured my swollen lips again. Remember when I said I was afraid of frightening you? Yes, I mumbled, but he silenced me with another deep kiss. I clutched his robe, shaking. I first saw you when you were 16. At 16, my mother was still alive. I stared at him, tears suddenly welling up. He held me close, gently rubbing my back. You were underage then. I had to wait. Then your mother passed away before you were even 18. I remember now. You came to Mom's funeral. I pressed against his chest, tears falling. You told me to take care of myself, not to cry too much. You grew up, became an adult, but the timing wasn't right. Sophie, I still had to wait. Alexander cradled my face, wiping away my tears. I remembered how during those years, my uncles would occasionally mention setting up dates for me. But I'd just lost my mother and was so young. I hadn't had any interest in romance. Then you went to college and fell for someone else. I had dark thoughts about stealing you away. But seeing you happy with him, I gave up that idea. Those 2 whole years, Sophie, I'd never suffered like that before. Alexander looked down at me. His fingers traced my eyebrows, every inch of my face, finally landing on the corner of my eye where tears leaked out. Don't cry, Sophie. Alexander, so when you said you were afraid of frightening me, was it because you'd loved me since I was 16? Alexander didn't answer. The truth was far more complicated, but he couldn't tell Sophie about those secret, hidden feelings. She'd appeared in his dreams countless times, and in those dreams, he'd done many inappropriate things. But now the dream was real. She was truly in his arms. Yes, I used to despise myself for these feelings. I even saw a therapist about it. But teenagers having secret crushes is normal, right? But I was 6 years older than you, Sophie. At her age, she probably dreamed of pure romance. But at his age, he'd already felt intense desire for the girl he loved. I looked at him troubled. True, you are 6 years older. My friend says men start going downhill at 25 and you're already 28. Before I could finish, Alexander suddenly lifted me up. The world spun as I fell onto the soft bed, enveloped in his warmth. Sophie, seeing is believing. Why don't you look, touch, feel for yourself before deciding? He took my hand, guiding it down. My eyes went wide as I stared at him. Alexander. He seemed amused by my expression. How's 28? I tried to pull my hand back but he held it firmly. He leaned down, kissing me again. Sophie, don't cry later. I won't go easy on you even if you do. But he did go easy on me. Just like at my mother's funeral years ago, when I'd cried so much I'd completely softened his heart. And now, when a single tear fell as I lay beneath him, he stopped, holding me close and comforting me for a long time. That night felt endless, like dawn would never come. But the next day seemed so short. When I opened my eyes, it was already afternoon. The moment I woke up, Alexander kissed me. Time to get up. Your uncles will be upset if you sleep any longer. I smiled with my eyes closed, reaching up for a hug. He bent down and lifted me. My sweet Sophie, soft as cotton, just like your name. Do you like that? I looked at him boldly, then lost my nerve and buried my face in his chest. Alexander carried me steadily toward the bathroom. After a long moment, he answered. Like it. Love it. He'd always loved it. Had loved it for so long. During times I hadn't even known. During my sadness and my joy. Someone had been caring about my every emotion. I didn't know what the future would bring. But in this moment, this instant, I felt completely happy, completely content. 19. On my wedding day with Alexander, Ethan's parents came. But Ethan didn't. Meeting his parents was a bit awkward. But I didn't let my history with Ethan affect how I treated them. They'd been nice to me when we were dating, even though I knew they hadn't really approved of me. But Alexander's attitude toward them was cold. They looked nervous. Ethan had once said his father had to bow to Alexander. It was true their family wasn't what it used to be. They were declining. Offending Alexander now could ruin them completely. Seeing the anxiety in Ethan's mother's eyes, I remembered how she'd come to my mother's funeral, how she'd held me and cried with me. I tugged gently at Alexander's sleeve. His expression softened slightly and he accepted their wedding gift. While changing into my reception dress, I got a text from an unknown number. Sophie, congratulations on your wedding. I knew it was from Ethan. After thinking, I replied with a simple thank you. A moment later, another message came. If I'd kissed you that night during the dare game, would we still be together? I didn't reply, just blocked this number too. There are no what-ifs in life. And I was so grateful for his foolishness that day. Without it, I wouldn't have left the country in despair. Wouldn't have agreed to meet Alexander. Wouldn't have known what it felt like to be loved so completely. Sophie, are you ready? Alexander opened the door. I turned to him, beaming. All done.